Welcome to lesson 11.7. How did the flow of immigration here into Western Canada affect our character? So stick around and let's learn something. We know that immigration changes identity. And in lesson 11.7, we're going to find out how did the flow of immigration influence the character of Western Canada, the identity of Western Canada. And now we have our immigrants, they're settling in. We know that many newcomers, they started making their way out west after Confederation in 1867, and they were lured by the many advertisements and by the government agents who were selling Canada. You love it. I'm doing the air quotations. You can't see it because you can't see my face. You can only hear my voice. And the problem was with this, with these advertisements, we know that advertisements are not always what they seem to be. There was false advertising that was taking place. And we know that our immigrants that made their way over, they had years and years and years of many hardships. The map that we see here, this is in 1905. So this is right after Alberta and Saskatchewan become provinces. And you can see some of the communities that are here from the people that are moving their way over to Canada's west. And Canada's west is starting to look like a pluralistic society. By 1911, 80% of the Western population of Canada was foreign-born. But we've said this before, there was years of hardship, and it was tough for prairie farmers to make a profit. But that didn't stop people from coming over. We know that these hardships, though, they had to build their homes. They had to plow with animal-drawn plows. And they struggled to grow their crops, most definitely. But they came from many backgrounds. The chart here, the table here, you can see the ethnic origin of Canada's West, 1881 to 1901 to 1911. And there's a large British immigration population, I should say ethnic origin, but we have right down the list. We've got the French, we've got Germans, Scandinavians, our First Nations, our Aboriginals, Jewish, Ukrainian, Dutch, Italians, Russians, Asians, the Polish, other Europeans, and other people that are not represented on this table at all. But they're coming over to Western Canada and they're contributing to our pluralistic society. The people that were here were mainly farmers. It was the pillar of our Western economy was that of farming. And they are known as the great grain growers. And farmers back then, just like today, had an extremely difficult life. They worked and continue to work from sun up to sundown. And the vast majority of our farmers were farming wheat. And they had three things that were kind of working for them eventually to create a successful life for them. The first is the machinery. So prior to, or in the middle of the 1800s, the steps needed to have a farm were very difficult and intense. You had to clear the bush, you had to break sod with oxen plows. Then there was the seeding, and then by hand you're harvesting. You have to cut the grain, you have to tie them into bundles. It's not easy work, it's a lot of work. But new technologies started making their way over at the end of the 1800s, at the turn of the century there. So now we're getting tractors to replace our horses and our oxen. Now we're getting binders, not your 3-ring binders, but farming binders. They're cutting the wheat and they're rolling it. And luckily, we also now have the railway that can carry this wheat to market. Speaking of wheat, the early farmers used something called red fife, and it was excellent for flour, but it ripened late, which meant the prairie frost could destroy your crop. But over time, scientists, Canadian scientists at that, they made marquee wheat, which ripened fairly quickly, and farmers were able to avoid that early frost that would devastate their crops. And this opened up Western Canada even further. And farmers dubbed the Marquis the discovery of the century. And this led to exports. Well, guess what? Wheat is going to become our most important crop, and it gets shipped worldwide. And the first known shipment happened in 1876. So this is before Alberta and Saskatchewan are provinces. But the first shipment in terms of exportation leaves Manitoba. It's not an international shipment. It's heading over to Ontario, but still a feat nonetheless. They send 884 bushels of wheat over to Ontario. And by 1921, 156 billion bushels of wheat were produced. Yes, they were growing other things like barley and oats, but in the West, wheat was king. If any of you are hockey fans, you will recognize Wheat Kings. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google is your friend. Go and Google it. All right, I want you to head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.